summers spent under the clear skies. But it is hard to hold on to those memories, for they were replaced with a world filled with smoke, blood, and the deafening sound of war. The places I used to run through barefoot, the streets where I laughed with my friends, were now filled with rubble, and the story would travel so far, beyond the broken streets of Syria, beyond the shattered hopes of my family, beyond the waves of a dangerous sea. But this is my true story, a child's story wrapped in fear, hope, and loss. I am just a boy caught in the midst of a war that no child should ever know. Yet my journey became a psychology-breaking story that touched hearts around the world. Through my eyes, you will see the invisible scars of a child's psyche trapped in chaos, the fragile dreams that flicker even in the darkest times. This story is not just about me. It is a story of millions, the story of Syria, and the story of every child forced to flee their home. As you listen to my tale, prepare to witness the raw depths of human emotion, the true cost of conflict, and the silent cries of a child whose story must never be forgotten. It is hard for me to recall the way things were before everything began to fall apart. The memories feel distant now, as though they belonged to someone else, a different life. Syria, the country I called home, was once a place filled with laughter, the sound of children playing, the warm air of summers spent under the clear skies. But it is hard to hold on to those memories, for they were replaced with a world filled with smoke, blood, and the deafening sound of war. The places I used to run through barefoot, the streets where I laughed with my friends, were now filled with rubble and the constant smell of fear. I didn't know it then, but the life I knew was slipping through my fingers, bit by bit. My name is Island Kurdi, and my story, our story, is not just one of survival. It is the story of a child caught in a storm of chaos and loss. This is a true story. The story of a family desperate to escape the grip of violence, to survive in a world that no longer made sense. The story of a child who only wanted to be safe, but who had no choice but to fight for his life, even though he was still too young to understand the full cost of it all. My family and I lived in Kobani, a city in northern Syria that had been ravaged by war. It was a place where the sound of planes and bombs was as familiar to us as the calls to prayer from the mosque. We knew fear, we knew pain, but still, there was hope. There had to be hope, right? My mother, Rehan, would often tell me stories of a place called Canada, a land far, far away, where children could run free in the fields, where there were no bombs, no tanks, no sound of gunfire. It was a dream, a place where we could begin again. My father, Abdullah, would smile and say, "One day, we will be there. One day, you will run free like those children." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand why we had to leave, why the home I loved, the streets where I played, had become dangerous. I didn't understand why my parents were so worried. The world was changing, and I could see the sadness in their eyes. It was only when we left, when the borders became a place of escape, that I realized how much I had lost. It was a bright day when we first began our journey. I remember it clearly, even though it feels like a dream. We packed our things into small bags, enough to keep us alive, enough to survive, but not enough to keep us whole. The house we had lived in for years was no longer ours. The garden where I used to play was empty. No laughter, no toys. We left everything behind in search of safety, in search of a new life. My mother, always so strong, held my hand tightly. Her fingers were warm, but I could feel the tremor in her grip. I tried to comfort her, telling her that everything would be okay. But in my heart, I knew she was scared. We all were. My father was the strongest man I knew, but even he couldn't shield us from what was happening. His voice, usually so calm and confident, now seemed uncertain. He didn't want to say it, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't know what was going to happen next. We began our journey on foot through the war-torn streets. There were other families around us, each one carrying their own story, their own fear. Some were crying, some were silent, and others walked like zombies, their faces empty of emotion. But we kept going, walking through the rubble, stepping over broken glass, and ignoring the sounds of violence that seemed to follow us. We couldn't stop. We couldn't turn back. We reached Turkey after days of walking. I remember the exhaustion on my mother's face and the way my father's shoulders sagged. We were tired, we were hungry, but we had to keep going. I could see the fear in my father's eyes, the same fear I felt in my chest. But we didn't have a choice. There was no future for us in Syria. We were refugees, displaced and lost, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a dream of a better life. As a child, I didn't fully grasp the depth of what was happening, but I understood the fear. I understood the pain. I could feel the weight of it on my parents. They tried so hard to protect me, to shelter me from the reality of the world, but even I could see it, the sadness, the exhaustion, the fear. It wasn't just the adults who were scared. I was scared too. I was a child, just a child, and the world was no longer a safe place for me. I remember clinging to my mother's side as we waited for the boat that would take us across the sea. The boat, they told me, would be our escape. The sea was vast, and we had heard stories of people who had made it to safety, who had crossed the water to find peace. My father reassured me, telling me that everything would be fine, but the truth was, we were afraid. The journey ahead was uncertain. The boat seemed too small for the vast ocean we had to cross, but it was our only option. As I sat in my father's arms, staring at the water, I didn't understand what was to come. I just wanted to be safe. I wanted to play again, to laugh again. I wanted the world to be as it was before, bright, full of life, full of hope. But it was no longer that way. My parents did their best to protect me, but deep down, I could feel the weight of their worry. They had made the decision, and now I would follow them. But I didn't know then that my story would become a breaking story, a story that would echo around the world and touch hearts far beyond Syria. The true story of a child whose hope would be tested, whose innocence would be lost, and whose fate would be decided in the cruelest of ways. The boat was small, too small for so many people. There were other families with us, all of them hoping, all of them dreaming of a better future. We sailed across the water, the waves crashing against the sides of the boat, but we held on tight. The sea was our path to freedom. My parents whispered to me that soon we would be in a place where we could be safe, where we could live without fear. But I didn't know that the journey we had just begun would soon become a nightmare. I didn't know that the fragile boat we were in wouldn't survive the storm, that the hopes and dreams we carried with us would be drowned in the cold waters of the Mediterranean. I didn't know that the moment we left the shore would be the moment our lives would change forever. The waves were growing stronger, the boat was rocking, and I could feel the fear rising in my chest. I wanted to cry, but I held back, hoping that everything would be okay. But as the waves hit harder, I felt the boat start to sink. It wasn't just water that was flooding in, it was fear. It was panic. It was the end of our journey, and in that moment I realized that hope was a fragile thing. No matter how tightly you hold on, no matter how much you believe in the dream of safety, there are forces in this world that you can't control. As the boat tipped, as the cold water pulled me under, I clung to my mother, to my father, but everything went black. My body was cold, my lungs filled with water. The world around me faded away, and I became one with the sea. I didn't know it then, but my story, my life, was no longer mine alone. It was now part of a greater story, a story that would shake the world, a story that would speak for all the children like me. Children lost, children who never had the chance to see the world the way it was meant to be. Looking back, it's hard to understand it all. The journey was supposed to be an escape, a chance at a better life, but instead it became a story of loss, a story that would break hearts and change lives forever. My story is just one of many, but it is a story that speaks for all children like me. Children who were caught in the storm of war, who never had a choice but to run, who escaped to survive. This is my story, a story of a child, of a family, and of a world that failed to protect us. But it is not just my story. It is the story of every child who had to leave behind their home, their safety, their childhood. It is the story of every parent who made the hardest decision of their life, whether to stay and fight or to run and hope. It is the story of a journey that began with hope but ended with heartbreak. In the end, I am just a child, but my story, our story, is more than just a story. It is a reminder of what happens when we fail to protect the innocent, when we fail to protect the most vulnerable among us. It is a breaking story, a story that echoes through time, a story that must never be forgotten. The boat rocked gently at first as we sat huddled together, our faces tense with a mixture of fear and hope. I could feel the salt of the sea air on my skin, a constant reminder that the journey we were on was both a dream and a nightmare. We were leaving behind Syria, the place where I was born, a land torn apart by war. My father held my hand tightly, as if his grip could shield me from the danger we faced. My mother whispered soft words of reassurance in my ear, trying to calm me, but I could hear the quiver in her voice, the fear she couldn't hide. We had crossed miles of land, walked through streets filled with the echoes of gunfire, and now we were at the edge of the world, at the shore where the sea promised safety. The boat before us, small and fragile, seemed too tiny to carry the weight of our hopes. Yet, like many others, we boarded, driven by the desperation to escape the violence that had consumed our home. It was a journey that millions like us had made, one of survival, one that was supposed to lead to freedom. This was supposed to be our way out. The boat was the last glimmer of hope we had. The sea was our escape. My mother, holding me close, said, "Soon we'll be in a place where you can play without fear. There will be no bombs, no soldiers, just peace." But how could I understand? I was just a child, too young to comprehend the true weight of what we were doing. All I knew was that the boat was our chance. I was scared, but I trusted my parents. They had always protected me, and I believed they would keep me safe now. But the sea didn't care about our hopes or our dreams. It didn't care that we were a family, fleeing war, seeking a better life. It didn't care about our story. The water was unforgiving, and our fragile boat, filled with people who had risked everything, was no match for the power of the ocean. The first wave hit hard. I remember the way the boat tilted, the panic in the eyes of the other passengers. The sea had turned on us, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. The boat rocked violently, tossing us back and forth like toys in a child's hands. I could hear my father shouting, trying to calm everyone, telling them to hold on, but the noise of the waves drowned him out. The cries of the other families were lost in the roar of the water. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Then, without warning, the boat flipped. The world around me became a whirlpool of water, cold and dark, pulling me down. I could feel my body being yanked beneath the surface, the water rushing into my mouth, my lungs, my eyes. I tried to scream, but the waves swallowed my voice. I reached out in the darkness, desperate to find someone, anyone. But everything was spinning and my arms felt heavy, useless. My mother was nowhere to be seen. My father... In those moments, I felt a fear so deep, so consuming, that it felt like the water itself was inside me, pressing on my chest, suffocating me. The warmth of my family, the safety of their embrace, was gone. I couldn't see them, couldn't feel them. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart beating, the roar of the ocean, and the darkness closing in around me. When I opened my eyes again, everything was still. The coldness had seeped into my bones, and the world around me had grown eerily quiet. My body floated in the water, lifeless, my eyes staring into the sky above. I could no longer feel the pain, no longer feel the fear. It was as if time had stopped and all that was left was the quiet, endless blue of the sea. But somewhere far away, my father was still searching for us, still calling out my name, still trying to hold on to the hope that we could be found. My father, who had always been my protector, was now alone, adrift in the vast sea of loss and grief. He had given everything to keep us safe. And now, even his strength wasn't enough. What I didn't know then was that my death, my disappearance beneath the waves, would become more than just the loss of a child. It would become a symbol of the thousands of children, just like me, who had drowned in these same waters, whose lives had been claimed by the same waves. My story was not just my own. It was the story of every child who had lost their life in the pursuit of a better future. The story of every family that had been torn apart by war, by displacement, by hopelessness. The loss of my life, my innocent life, was a psychological wound that would never heal. For my father, for my mother, for all the people who knew us, my death was a painful reminder of how fragile life is, how easily it can be taken away. It was a reminder that sometimes, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we hope, we cannot outrun the storms that come for us. And yet, my story, this child's story, would not fade into the background. It would not be forgotten. It was not just a tragedy. It was a wake-up call. It was a breaking story that would shake the world to its core, a story that would demand to be heard, to be felt. For the world needed to understand. It needed to feel the pain of what happened, to comprehend the true cost of war, of displacement, and of the choices we make. The tragedy of my death was not just the loss of one child. It was the loss of millions. It was the loss of innocence, the loss of hope, and the loss of a future. My death became a story that no one could ignore, a story that would reverberate around the world. It was a story of war, of migration, and of human suffering. It was a story that spoke not only to the pain of Syria, but to the pain of every refugee, every displaced person, and every child caught in the crossfire of a conflict they didn't start. As I drifted away from this world, my story lived on. It lived in the hearts of the people who saw my lifeless body on the shores of Turkey. It lived in the minds of those who heard my name, who saw my face, who understood that I was just one of many. It became a story that could no longer be ignored, a story that would change the world. My story was not just about a child who died. It was about the millions who were still alive, still fighting for their lives, still seeking safety. In the end, my story was not just mine. It was everyone's story. It was the story of survival, of loss, of courage, and of the indomitable strength of the human spirit. It was a story that demanded to be told, no matter the cost. And though my life was cut short, my legacy lived on in the stories of those who followed me, those who lived through the same horrors, those who still had the strength to hope. I never knew that my life, my short, fragile life, would become a symbol. I never understood that my story would reach beyond the borders of Syria, beyond the shores of the sea, to the far corners of the world. But on September 2nd, 2015, my lifeless body washed ashore on the beaches of Bodrum, Turkey. A photographer captured that moment, and in an instant, my story was no longer just mine. It was the world's. The photograph, a haunting image of a child's body left face down in the sand, became a reflection of the horrors we had experienced, of the suffering that millions of refugees faced every day. It wasn't just a photo. It was an awakening. It was a call to action. The world, for the first time, was forced to see the human cost of war, the true face of the refugee crisis, through the eyes of an innocent child. When the photo of my body spread across social media, it didn't just raise awareness, it sparked a global outcry. People from all over the world were moved, shaken, and enraged. The image of my small, lifeless form became a symbol of the tragic loss of life, the brutality of war, and the desperation of those fleeing for their lives. My death, in a strange way, opened the eyes of the world to the suffering of countless others like me. Governments around the world began to respond. Policies on refugee resettlement were revisited. Some countries pledged to take in more refugees, to open their borders, to give us a chance at a better life. There were protests, rallies, and calls for change. But there was something that people couldn't quite grasp. The fact that the pain my family felt, the pain of my father, my mother, my brother, could never be undone. No amount of political change could bring us back. No campaign, no gesture could reverse the loss. My uncle, T. McCurdy, moved to Canada after the tragedy, dedicating himself to raising awareness about the plight of refugees. He worked tirelessly to bring attention to the ongoing crisis, to give a voice to the millions of displaced people who had no one to listen to them. His efforts, and the efforts of so many others, became a movement. My story, my death, had transformed into a global call for action, a demand for humanity to stand up, to act, to make sure that no more children like me would drown in the sea. It is hard to put into words the psychological impact of my death. My life, my death, became a mirror reflecting the suffering of so many others. It wasn't just a child's death, it was the death of innocence, the death of hope. The world saw me, and in seeing me, they saw the millions of others who had suffered in silence, who had lost their lives, their families, their homes, in pursuit of a dream of safety and peace. In the eyes of my father, I was more than just his son. I was the embodiment of a lost future, of a future that was stolen from us by the violence that consumed our world. My mother, who had tried so hard to protect me, who had dreamed of a better life for me, was now left with nothing but the memory of what could have been. My father's pain was immeasurable. He had lost his family, his hope, his reason for living. But my death, the death of a child, this child, was more than just a personal tragedy. It was a global tragedy. It shook the conscience of the world. It became a breaking story that transcended borders, languages, and cultures. It demanded to be heard, to be understood. It was a story that spoke of war, of suffering, and of the human cost of conflict. It was a child's story, a true story, that could no longer be ignored. My death was the turning point in the refugee crisis. For years, the world had turned a blind eye to the suffering of displaced people. The crisis had been unfolding for years, but it took my death to bring it to the forefront of global consciousness. The photo of my body was a wake-up call, a call to action that could no longer be ignored. People who had once been indifferent were now forced to confront the reality of the crisis. But there was also something deeper at play, the psychological impact on humanity itself. People were no longer able to separate themselves from the suffering of others. My death forced people to question their own values, their own responsibility. How could a world so full of abundance allow a child to drown on a beach? How could governments, organizations, and individuals turn a blind eye to the suffering of those fleeing war and persecution? The reaction to my death was overwhelming, but it also raised questions that lingered. The world mourned my loss, but it also became a moment of self-reflection. People began to ask themselves, what can we do to stop this? What can we do to make sure that no more children like Aylan will lose their lives in this way? My story, in the end, wasn't just a story of loss. It was a story of awakening. It was a story of the world coming face to face with its own humanity. Even though I am no longer here, my story has lived on. My name, my face have become symbols of the refugee crisis, of the need for change. But it is not enough to remember my story. It is not enough to feel sadness for a moment and then move on. My story must be a catalyst for change, a driving force behind the global effort to end the suffering of millions of refugees. In the years that have passed since that tragic day on the beach, the world has not forgotten me. My story continues to resonate with people around the globe, continuing to raise awareness, continuing to demand action. My death became a turning point, a breaking point. But the fight for the rights of refugees continues. My family continues to fight, to speak out, to ensure that my death was not in vain. The world may have heard my story, but it is up to all of us to make sure that it doesn't become just another tragic tale lost in the sands of time. My story, the story of a child who lost everything, must be the story that drives change. It must be the story that pushes the world to act, to ensure that no more children drown in the sea, that no more families are torn apart by war. This is the true story of Aylan Kurdi. a child whose death sparked a global movement, whose story became a voice for millions of others like him. And it is a story that must continue to be told.
There was once a little girl in Gaza who loved the sound of waves more than the sound of silence. But silence came anyway, shaped like fire. What you're about to read is not fiction. This is a true story, a war story carved into the ruins of Palestine, soaked in the psychology of loss and the echoes of everything Israel destroyed. I survived one massacre as a child. I did not survive the second. On July 17, 2025, I was killed by an Israeli airstrike, just like my family before me. But before my voice was silenced, I left behind this story, not for sympathy, but because the world has forgotten what it means to listen. This is Gaza. This is what war does to children. This is what happens when justice is buried deeper than the bodies. So now, even from beyond the rubble, I will speak. The morning of that day arrived like any other in Gaza, filled with the faint scent of sea salt carried by a warm wind, the laughter of my brothers echoing in the narrow streets, and my mother's gentle voice calling us to hurry before the beach grew too crowded. I was 9 years old, and for that single morning I allowed myself to believe that perhaps we were a normal family living in a normal place, untouched by war, distant from headlines and politics, far removed from the cruel grip of Israel's constant shadow over Palestine. We were just a family heading to the seaside, carrying bread wrapped in cloth, a kettle of mint tea, and my father's small transistor radio playing a soft, crackling tune. That was our story. A true story. One that didn't yet involve blood or loss or tragedy. One that felt full of possibility, not pain. My older sister had tied my hair in 2 careful braids, humming a lullaby our grandmother used to sing, while my youngest brother held my hand, asking if the sea would be cold today. In that fleeting hour, I didn't think of politics. I didn't think of Israel or Gaza, or of what it meant to live in a land soaked in war stories and broken promises. I thought only of shells I would collect, waves I would run from, and how my father's laughter always seemed louder near the sea. But even in those tender moments, deep in my chest there was something else, an echo maybe, a kind of tension that never left. Gaza was not a place where peace ever truly settled. It hovered like dust, waiting to be blown away at the first gust of wind. Still that morning I clung to it. I built sandcastles beside my brothers as if we weren't building them atop a graveyard. But even as we shaped moats in the sand and drew flags on paper that fluttered weakly in the breeze, there was something about the silence between the waves that felt heavier than it should have been. Like the sky itself was holding its breath. Like Gaza had learned long ago how to pretend calm while trembling underneath, as if even the earth was exhausted by carrying the weight of too many war stories buried in its soil. I remember the way the mint tea smelled, sweet and sharp, and how my mother's eyes softened as she passed the cups to each of us, her hands trembling slightly but her smile fixed and brave, because in Gaza, mothers learn how to mask fear with routine, how to disguise anxiety behind the gentle folds of bread, how to anchor their children in ritual with the sea itself cannot promise safety. We were surrounded by so much blue, sky, water, the tiny cloth blanket beneath us, and yet, that blue was not freedom. It was a reminder of what we could never touch: peace. The psychology of survival in Gaza is not something written in books. It lives in the way children scan the sky before they laugh too loud, in the way fathers pause before turning on the radio, fearing what frequency might carry not music but mourning, and in the way girls like me memorize the names of the dead, the way others memorize fairy tales. My war story began long before that day, but it found its climax in a single breath, a single second, a single flash that tore through our quiet joy like a scream through silence. And then it happened. A sound so unnatural, so violent, it didn't feel real. It felt like the earth itself had cracked open above us. There was a sudden light, blinding and wrong, and then the sound of everything I loved shattering into pieces I would never be able to pick up again. I didn't realize I was screaming until I tasted sand and blood in my mouth. I didn't know whose arms I was reaching for, because they were all gone in a blink. In that cursed instant when Israel decided that a beach in Gaza was a battlefield and not a place where a family told their true story in the language of picnics and lullabies. My father's radio landed near me, still hissing softly. A static lullaby for a child who no longer had a father. My sister's braid had come undone and lay beside her like a ribbon that had lost its meaning. The bread we packed was soaked in tea and blood, and my brothers, oh God, my brothers, they were too quiet, and that silence was louder than any explosion. This was not a dream. This was not fiction. This was a true story, unfolding in the ruins of a moment that was supposed to be simple and sacred. And the cameras came. They always come. They captured my face, my screams, my hands covered in ash and panic and pieces of everything I loved. They called me the symbol of war, the little girl from Gaza whose sorrow had become a headline. But they never asked me what it felt like. They never wanted to hear the real war story. Not the clean version for newspapers, but the messy, unbearable truth that I would carry forever in the hollows of my chest. What is the psychology of a child who sees everything she loves erased in a second? What happens to the soul when it breaks, before it even understands what life is supposed to be? No one tells you that trauma doesn't come in one big wave. It comes in echoes, in nightmares, in the way you flinch when a door slams, in the way you forget how to speak for days at a time because there is no language for losing everything except tears. In Gaza, we cry with our eyes open. We mourn with our hands busy. We survive with our hearts half functioning. In the days that followed, I stopped speaking. I stopped eating. I stopped pretending. I clutched my sister's scarf to my chest like it was a map to the past. My aunt tried to hug me, and I recoiled. The psychologists came. They used words I didn't understand. Dissociation, shock, post-traumatic stress. They drew diagrams and took notes, but none of them could draw my family back. None of them could explain why Israel was allowed to rewrite my childhood in fire. They said, "This is Gaza." They said, "This is war." They said, "This is the cost." But I was not a number. I was a child. And this was my story. A true story, not one shaped by generals or governments, but by the hands of a little girl clutching the shirt her mother folded the night before the sky betrayed us. Sometimes I imagined what life would have been like if we hadn't gone to the beach that day. Would I still be braiding my sister's hair? Would my brothers be chasing kites in the street? Would my father still be singing to his radio? But wishing changes nothing in Palestine. We learn young that grief is the soil we grow from. I began to write, not because it healed me, but because it gave shape to the chaos inside. I wrote names, places, smells, sounds. I wrote so the world wouldn't forget that the victims have voices too. I wrote because the war story I lived through had to be remembered not as an accident but as evidence. And from that rubble, from that unbearable silence, a dream formed. Not the kind of dream most girls my age had. Not of dresses or parties, but of justice. Of speaking in a courtroom. Of pointing to a map and saying, "Here, this is where my family was killed." Of looking into the eyes of the world and demanding that someone, anyone, listen. Because in the end, I was not just a girl from Gaza. I was the war story they tried to silence. I was the voice that Israel could not erase. I was the beginning of something louder than bombs. And that night, as I lay under a roof that no longer felt like shelter, staring at stars that looked too far away to help, I whispered a promise to the sky. A quiet vow, buried beneath grief and ash. One day, I will grow up. One day, I will become the voice of every child lost to this endless war. One day I will turn this true story into the justice it deserves. They say justice wears a blindfold. But here in Gaza, we learn to see even when it hurts. Because closing our eyes has never saved us, and silence has never protected us from the storm. We survive by seeing too much, by remembering everything, by turning wounds into testimony. When I began my studies at the Islamic University of Gaza, the textbooks in my bag were heavier than they should have been, not because of their size or weight, but because I carried them like gravestones, symbols of the family I had buried in the sand, emblems of the story that still screamed beneath my skin. A true story, carved by missiles, burned into memory by Israel's brutal campaign against my childhood, against every child's future in Palestine. I walked through the university gates not as a hopeful young girl, but as a survivor, wrapped in invisible scars, still hearing the waves of that cursed beach day inside my ears, still feeling the static of my father's broken radio in my chest, still smelling the smoke that turned a peaceful morning into a never-ending war story. People around me smiled. They dreamed of law firms and careers, but I could not afford dreams that didn't bleed. I was not studying law to build a life. I was studying law to document lives lost, to give voice to Gaza's silenced children, to turn pain into paper, trauma into legal structure, psychology into political evidence, and to hold Israel accountable for every shattered home, every amputated limb, every bedtime story interrupted by a drone. It was strange how normal the world seemed inside those classrooms. Even as outside, Gaza collapsed in pieces, our windows rattling from distant bombings, our electricity cutting off mid-lecture, our notebooks stained with candle wax and ash. But we continued, because in Gaza the act of learning is resistance, and knowledge is a form of survival, a fragile but defiant rejection of the occupation that tries to keep us ignorant and afraid. My classmates were brilliant, resilient, fierce in their own quiet ways. Many of them had lost siblings, some had lost parents. Others had seen their own bodies marked permanently by war. But none of us allowed that pain to paralyze us. Instead, we carried our stories into the lecture halls like sacred burdens, turning every legal theory into a question that burned with urgency. Who protects the children of Gaza when international law becomes a whisper? When I read the Geneva Conventions, I didn't see theory. I saw my brother's body cradled in my lap, blood pooling into sand that could no longer absorb our sorrow. When I studied the definitions of war crimes, I didn't see paragraphs. I saw my mother shielding us with her body, whispering prayers that God alone heard in the seconds before the sky exploded. And when I read about justice, I felt rage. Not because I didn't believe in justice, but because I had seen how it was denied to us over and over again. How the world called us statistics, collateral damage, unfortunate incidents, when in truth we were stories, true stories, living, breathing war stories that deserved to be heard, believed, remembered. During those years, I wrote constantly, not just for my classes, but for my sanity. For the children of Gaza who no longer had voices. For the countless families who died without a trial, without recognition, without dignity. I filled notebook after notebook with testimonies from the camps, the clinics, the destroyed neighborhoods. Stories of children who drew flowers on crumbling walls. Stories of mothers giving birth under bombings. Stories of teenagers arrested for throwing stones. Stories of men buried without names. Stories of silence so loud it could crush your soul. These were not mere anecdotes to me, not passing tragedies to be consumed and forgotten. They were the bricks of my argument, the pillars of my outrage, the precise moments where my personal grief met legal terminology, where my private mourning aligned with global accountability. These weren't just stories, they were indictments. Each line I wrote was a quiet, stubborn declaration that Gaza was not disposable, that Palestine was not voiceless, and that Israel's actions would be remembered, not as history written by victors, but as a true story written by survivors. The more I studied, the more I understood that the law, though powerful in ink, was powerless without will. Justice was not inevitable. It had to be hunted, cornered, and held to the light. And so I sharpened my knowledge like a blade, not for vengeance, but for truth. I trained my memory to hold details like evidence. The date of the strike, the name of the street, the exact time the sirens failed to sound. I turned my mind into an archive, because no court could deny what I refused to let die. In practice sessions, my voice often trembled, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what I carried. I wasn't rehearsing for a career. I was training to resurrect the dead with words. I wanted to speak for the boy who choked on dust beneath collapsed ceilings, for the girl who was shot while fetching water, for the teacher whose classroom became a morgue. These were the cases I prepared for, not hypotheticals, but flesh and blood tragedies. The everyday war stories of Gaza turned legal frameworks, the true stories of Palestine forced to wear masks of silence. And even when the professors couldn't answer my questions about precedent, about jurisdiction, about justice in the face of power, I didn't stop asking them, because I wasn't seeking reassurance. I was demanding reckoning. I needed the world to stop using our pain as a political football. I needed them to see Gaza not as a footnote, but as the front line of human rights. The bleeding evidence of a world that had chosen complicity. Graduation did not feel like a celebration. It felt like the slow exhale after years of holding my breath. As I held my diploma, I felt no joy, only responsibility. I had crossed a threshold, not into peace, but into deeper struggle. I had become something more than a student. I was now a living brief, a walking witness, a case file in motion. And I knew that somewhere, someday, I would find myself in a real courtroom. And when I did, I would not plead. I would present. I would not tremble. I would testify. And I would say, with the unwavering voice of a girl who had lived through the unspeakable, this is my story. This is Gaza's war story. This is Palestine's true story. And this is why justice cannot wait. They say every story has an end, but in Gaza, endings are rarely peaceful. They come not with closure, but with craters. Not with silence, but with sirens. Not with justice, but with obliteration. And on the morning of July 17th, 2025, I woke with the eerie feeling that the sky itself was grieving. There was a strange stillness in the air. Not the kind that comforts you, but the kind that warns you. The clouds were thick, gray, and unmoving, as if they too had paused to hold their breath, knowing what the day would bring. Even the birds, those tireless witnesses to our suffering, seemed to have fled. I dressed slowly, as if each movement deserved reverence. I packed my files, knowing they contained more than arguments. They carried names, facts, dates, and testimonies. They were the heartbeats of the voiceless. I had a hearing scheduled, a legal matter so routine in the outside world, yet in Gaza, every courtroom becomes a battleground for truth. As I stepped into the narrow streets of Jabalia, with their crumbling buildings and ghost-like quiet, children waved at me from broken windows and twisted alleyways. "Huda, are you going to bring justice today?" one of them asked, clutching a flat football in one hand and a piece of bread in the other. I smiled, not because I believed the answer was yes, but because in Gaza, A smile is a child's last defense against despair. I'd always known that my story was not mine alone. My true story was the collective story of Gaza's daughters and sons, of mothers who bled into rubble, of fathers buried beneath cinder blocks, of babies who died nameless. My war story was one stitched with blood and prayers, one Israel tried to erase, one the world tried to ignore, one Palestine whispered into the wind so that history could not forget. And then, it happened. A flash, a whistle, a silence so total it shattered the air. I remember a blinding white light exploding in the sky, and for a brief moment, I thought the sun had finally come to end it all. But it wasn't light. It was death. It was Israel. It was the missile that found me not in a battlefield, not holding a weapon, but holding court documents soaked with the ink of truth. It was the missile that saw me not as a threat, but as a voice. And in Gaza, a voice is the most dangerous thing you can have. I hit the ground before I knew I'd fallen. My bag flew from my shoulder, its contents dancing through the smoke like the last gasp of resistance. My body felt numb, but my mind was sharp. I could feel the blood escaping me, eager to reunite with the soil of my ancestors. And I realized then that I was returning to the sea, to the sand, to the 9-year-old girl on the beach who once screamed for her father. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid. Because justice, I had come to understand, doesn't always wear a black robe or speak from a bench. Sometimes justice bleeds. Sometimes it dies in alleyways. Sometimes it wears the face of a girl from Gaza who refused to be silent. Sometimes justice begins in martyrdom. As I lay dying, my body broken but my spirit wide awake, I thought of the children of Gaza, those still alive, those who might one day read my name in a footnote or see my picture in a headline and wonder why the world didn't protect me. I thought of all the people who had the power to stop this and chose instead to scroll past, to stay neutral, to debate our suffering like an academic question. Let me say this plainly now. Neutrality is a choice, and in the face of Israel's crimes, neutrality is complicity. You who watch from afar, who change the channel when Gaza burns, who read our war story and call it unfortunate but inevitable. You are not innocent. You are participants in the slow execution of a people, accomplices to a crime that will haunt the conscience of history. You have allowed Palestine to be a testing ground for weapons, for silence, for psychological warfare disguised as policy. And you wonder why we shout, why we throw stones, why we write with fire. Because when every breath becomes a political act, when every step risks triggering a drone, when every hospital bed becomes a courtroom of last words, and when every bedtime story turns into an obituary in waiting, you no longer dream of peace, you dream of being heard before you're buried. So I ask you, what justice can exist in a world where my blood must spell out the truth that your conscience refused to read? What humanity remains in you when my body lies broken in the street, and your only reaction is silence wrapped in sophistication, empathy packaged as performance, concern diluted by distance? You speak of complex conflicts, of ancient rivalries, of diplomacy and negotiations, while my people are erased in real time. Their names replaced by numbers, their childhoods documented in rubble, their futures pre-approved for destruction. You justify, analyze, politicize everything but recognize that this is not fiction. This is not theory. This is not a historical abstraction. This is a true story, born not of exaggeration but of evidence, carried not by myth but by memory, and it is written across the walls of Gaza in soot and ash, in shattered glass and broken lullabies, in the final gasps of children whose only crime was to be born on the wrong side of a checkpoint, under the wrong flag, in a land the world has deemed too complicated to save. Do not call me tragic, because tragedy implies helplessness, and I was never helpless. I was defiant. I was deliberate. I was loud in a world that tried to mute me. And I chose to live, to speak, to fight with words even when bullets silenced the room. Do not mourn me in silence, for your silence is the sound of complicity, the echo of a world too comfortable to care, too comfortable to act. Do not reduce me to a hashtag, an image, a soundbite, to be consumed and forgotten with the next wave of headlines. For my name is not a trend, it is a testimony. You cannot both pity us and ignore us. You cannot grieve our children while funding the bombs that kill them. You cannot weep for my story while denying its truth. I am no longer a body to bury, but a memory to carry. I am not ash. I am resistance. I am not silence. I am the scream that lives on. I am justice that refused to die quietly. And in those last seconds, when the sky turned back to smoke and the world faded into the shadows, I did not fear what came next. I whispered into the wind, into the blood-stained air of Gaza, into the heart of Palestine, into the soul of the oppressed everywhere. Tell them I was here. Tell them I lived. Tell them I fought with ink and breath and fire. Tell them I died holding my truth like a torch. And tell them this war story, this true story, will not end here. It will rise, it will echo, it will burn in every silence, until even the silence begins to scream.
If you've ever watched Squid Game, you know what it's like to hope for a second chance, to risk everything for survival. But here in Gaza, we're not playing for money or fame. We're just children, like me, Lena, 9 years old, waiting in endless lines, dreaming of bread, risking our lives for a bag of flour. While you listen to my story, remember, this isn't a show, this isn't a movie, this is my real life, a true child story from Gaza. And even after you finish this video, I'll still be here, living every day inside this never-ending game. My name is Lena. I am 9 years old, and my world is smaller than it used to be. I don't remember when the war started. Maybe it's always been here, with the loud sounds and the broken buildings and the people who never stop waiting. Mama says I was 4 when everything changed, but I feel like I've always been standing in a line for something. Water, bread, sometimes for nothing at all. Today is different. Today we are waiting for an aid package, Mama says. A relief package. That's what everyone calls it. As if hope can fit in a box wrapped with tape and a stamp, and the heavy steps of soldiers all around. I hold Mama's hand tight. She is quiet, but I can feel her heart beating fast through her palm. She squeezes my fingers so hard, I think she's scared the wind will carry me away if she lets go. The line is so long, I cannot see the front. It curls behind barbed wire like a snake with its head in a hole. On both sides, people are everywhere. Men and women, little children like me, babies on their mothers' backs. I hear crying, and sometimes I see someone stumble and fall, but nobody leaves the line. We are all stuck, like birds who forgot how to fly. Overhead, there are no real birds, only the buzzing of drones. Sometimes I imagine what it would sound like if there were doves instead of metal things, or if the sky was blue and empty, just once. The noise is always here. Even when the bombs are far away, you can feel the sky shaking. Mama tells me to cover my ears when the loudest ones fall, but I don't want to. I want to know where the sound is coming from and who it takes away this time. My stomach hurts. I tell myself I am just hungry, but I know it is also fear. Mama notices and bends down. Hold on, Habibti, she whispers. If we get a package today, you'll have bread, maybe some flour for a cake, maybe even a little chocolate. I nod, but it's hard to believe. I haven't tasted chocolate in a long time. I look around at the other children. Some are sitting on the ground, their legs curled under their thin bodies. Others are leaning on their mothers or standing with heads drooping, like wilted flowers. I see one little boy hugging a broken toy car, rubbing his thumb along the cracked wheel again and again. The man behind us is talking to someone, his voice loud and angry. 85 people yesterday, for a bag of flour. Mama shushes him. Not in front of the children, she says quietly, but her eyes look away, out past the line and into the broken city. I ask her, what happened to them? She doesn't answer. Instead, she kneels in front of me and zips up my jacket. Stay close, she says. Don't let go of my hand. The barbed wire fence is just ahead. It looks like something out of a bad dream. I can see a soldier at the far end, his gun pointed down, but his eyes never moving away from us. The people near the front of the line move slowly, one at a time, like they're stepping into a storm. Sometimes the soldiers yell and everyone freezes for a moment. Then the line moves again. It smells like dust and smoke. My nose stings. My throat feels dry, like I've been eating sand. There are no trees here, just broken walls and piles of bricks. Once, when I was little, there was a park with swings. Now, there's only the swing frame. No seat, nothing to hold on to. I hear someone coughing behind us. I turn and see a woman with a baby. The baby is crying, his lips cracked, his face dirty with tears and dust. The mother rocks him back and forth. She looks at me and tries to smile, but it is a tired, broken smile. Mama asks me if I want to sit down, but I shake my head. I'm afraid if I sit, I'll never want to stand up again. A boy a little older than me is looking for something in the dirt. He finds a small stone, smooth and white, and he presses it into his palm like a treasure. He looks up and catches my eye. For a moment, he grins, holding up the stone as if to say, "Look, something good in this place." I smile back, but the smile slips away fast. The line moves forward. The relief truck is still far away, hidden behind a wall and more soldiers. People say there are only a few packages today, not enough for everyone, as usual. Some people have been here all night, Mama says. They brought blankets and old sacks and even pillows, hoping to sleep in the line. I wonder what it would feel like to sleep under the open sky with all the noises. I don't think I could close my eyes. A dog walks by, thin as a stick, ribs showing under dirty fur. He sniffs at a pile of trash, then lies down next to a group of children. One of the children tries to pet him, but the dog doesn't move. I wonder if he is too tired or if he is sick. I feel sorry for him. I wish I had something to give him, but I don't even have bread for myself. I hear my mother to herself. I can't catch the words, but I know she is praying. I look at her at the lines around her eyes, the way her scarf is pulled tight around her face. She looks so tired. I want to tell her I'm not scared, that I'll be brave for her, but the words get stuck in my throat. I think about my dream. I want to live in a place where I don't have to stand in line for food, where Mama smiles because she's happy, and not just pretending. I want to run with the other children, to play with a real ball instead of stones. I want to see birds in the sky, real ones, not the buzzing machines that watch us from above. A shout comes from the front of the line. The crowd pushes forward, and for a second I'm afraid I'll lose Mama's hand. She pulls me close, and I feel her breath warm on my cheek. Don't let go, Lena, not for anything. We move a few steps forward, closer to the barbed wire. I can see the packages now, stacked on the ground near the soldiers. White bags, boxes with writing I can't read. Some people at the front are arguing with a soldier. A woman is crying, holding her arms out as if begging for something. The soldier shakes his head. I feel my heart beating so fast, it's like a bird fluttering inside my chest. I squeeze Mama's hand even tighter. "Mama, will we get a package today?" I whisper. She smiles, but it's the kind of smile that almost breaks your heart. "I don't know, Habibti, but we have to hope." The crowd moves again, and suddenly the sky cracks with the sound of another explosion, somewhere far but not far enough. Everyone ducks, holding each other, and for a moment nobody speaks. The dog lifts his head and whines, then puts it down again. When it's quiet again, Mama stands up and brushes the dust from my hair, determined. "Just a little longer," she says. "We have to hold on." I look up at the sky. The drones buzz louder now. I wonder if anyone is watching us, if anyone cares that we're all just trying to live one more day. The line inches forward. The packages are almost in sight. My stomach growls. I wonder what is inside. Bread, flour, maybe something sweet. I imagine what it would be like to open a package just for me. But then, I hear someone shouting again. This time it's a different sound, sharp and full of fear. The people at the front are pushing, some are crying. I grip Mama's hand and try not to cry. Are we next? Will we get a package? Or will we go home empty-handed again? I don't know. But I keep hoping. I have to. We move a little closer. Now, the barbed wire is right in front of us. It's sharp and tangled, twisted like a nest made by someone who forgot how to make things safe. I see pieces of torn clothing caught on the metal. Someone must have tried to squeeze through, or maybe the crowd pushed and the fence tore their sleeve. I can't stop staring at a little piece of pink cloth. I wonder if it belonged to a girl like me. Mama's hand is damp in mine. She keeps squeezing, and I squeeze back, but neither of us talks. My mouth is dry and sticky. I try to swallow, but it hurts. I hear my stomach making a noise, and I hope no one else notices. My lips are so dry, I keep licking them, but it doesn't help. The smell here is heavy, smoke, sweat, and something sour I don't want to name. People are pressed so close that I feel like I'm stuck between rocks. A man's elbow keeps bumping my back, but I'm too tired to care. Sometimes I close my eyes and pretend I'm somewhere else, lying on the carpet at home, with the sound of the fan in the window and Mama humming softly. But even in my mind, the buzzing comes back, louder than before. A drone passes overhead, low and slow, like it's looking for someone. Everyone looks up for a moment. Some people hold their breath. I do too. The shadow moves across us like a cloud, and then it's gone. A few minutes later, another loud sound comes from somewhere far away. The ground shakes. I can feel it in my toes, all the way up my legs. I try not to think about it. Ahead of us, a woman is holding a little girl, younger than me. The girl is reaching for something, maybe water, maybe just to be held tighter. The woman, something in her ear. Over and over, the girl has a big scrape on her knee, like she fell on the rough ground. I remember when I fell once, long ago before the war, and Mama kissed my knee and put a bandage on it. I wonder if anyone has bandages anymore. We shuffle forward. I can see the soldiers better now. There are 3 of them standing behind a wooden table with piles of white bags and boxes stacked behind them. They look big and tired, with their helmets and the black straps across their chests. Their eyes are hard and cold. One of them is drinking from a plastic bottle, and I stare at the water moving inside. My throat aches with thirst. Mama bends down in my ear. Don't look at them, Lena. Just keep your eyes down and stay close to me. I nod, but it's hard not to look. Everyone is watching the soldiers, even when they try not to. A man near the front starts shouting. He is waving a piece of paper in the air, his voice cracking like something about to break. We've been here all night! My children are hungry! The soldier ignores him. The other people in line look away, eyes fixed on the ground, waiting for the line to move again. I feel like crying, but I know Mama doesn't want me to. She needs me to be strong. Suddenly, a woman near the front faints. Her legs fold under her and she sinks to the ground. The people around her try to help, lifting her gently, giving her some water from a small bottle. The soldier yells something, and everyone freezes. Mama pulls me closer. I watch the woman's face. She is pale, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silent words. I wonder if she's praying, or if she's just too tired to speak. It's hot, even though it's still morning. The sun pushes through the gray sky, making the broken glass on the ground shine. I feel sweat trickling down my back. My hair sticks to my forehead. Mama wipes my face with her sleeve. Her touch is gentle, but I can see the worry in her eyes. We move forward again. Now we're almost at the table. I can see the packages clearly. The white bags look heavy. Some have blue writing on them. I try to read, but the letters make no sense. I wonder if there is rice inside, or flour, or maybe even sugar. I dream about sugar, just a spoonful in my tea, the way Mama used to give me when I was sick. The people at the front are arguing. Some say there aren't enough packages for everyone. A boy in a red shirt tugs at his mother's arm, his eyes wide with worry. I look at my own hands, small and dirty. I try to imagine what it would feel like to hold a package all my own. Behind me, I hear the man again.
They're not letting everyone through. You have to have a card or they turn you away.
Mama takes something from her pocket. A wrinkled paper folded and unfolded 100 times.
Here's our card, Lena,
She whispers.
hold on to it, just in case.
She presses it into my hand. The paper feels soft and thin. I close my fingers around it, hoping it will keep us safe. Suddenly, someone pushes from behind. The line surges forward. I stumble, but Mama grabs me, holding me upright. I hear shouting, but it sounds far away. My heart thuds in my chest. One of the soldiers lifts his hand, making everyone stop. He looks at us one by one, like he is counting. My stomach flips. What if we're the ones who get turned away? What if there's nothing left when we reach the table? Mama squeezes my shoulder.
We're almost there, Habibti, just a little more.
Her voice is shaking, but she tries to smile. I look around. I see the woman with the baby, still rocking back and forth. The old man who was shouting before has gone quiet. The boy with the red shirt is crying now, big tears rolling down his cheeks. I want to go to him, to tell him it will be okay, but I can't let go of Mama. A little girl next to us drops her doll. It lands in the dust, her hair tangled and dirty. The girl starts to cry, but her mother hushes her quickly. She picks up the doll, brushing the dirt away, and hands it back. The girl hugs the doll tightly as if it can keep her safe. Now we are right at the barbed wire. The soldier calls out, "Next!" People start moving, one at a time, ducking under the wire, stepping into the space by the table. Mama pulls me forward. I duck my head, careful not to catch my jacket on the sharp metal. I feel the fence scrape my back, but I don't say anything. Now we're inside the little square in front of the soldiers. Mama hands the card to the man at the table. He looks at it, then at us, then back at the card. For a moment, nobody moves. "Wait here," he says, and walks away with our card. My legs are shaking. I look up at Mama. Her face is pale, her lips pressed tight. She puts her arm around me, holding me close. I hear her, "It's all right, Lena. We've come this far. We won't leave without something." But I can see in her eyes that she's not sure. The other soldiers talk quietly. I try to listen, but their words are strange in a language I don't know. The bags of food are so close I can almost touch them. My fingers itch to reach out, to grab just one, but I know I have to wait. The man comes back holding our card. He gives it to Mama. "Only one bag," he says, his voice flat. Mama nods. She doesn't argue. She just takes the bag and hands it to me. It's heavy. I hold it in my arms, the plastic rough against my skin. I don't know what's inside, but it feels like hope and fear mixed together. Mama thanks the man in a soft voice. We turn to leave. I glance back at the people still waiting. The old woman, the boy with the red shirt, the mother with the baby. Some of them watch us, their eyes sad and tired. Others look away. We duck under the wire again, back into the crowd. Mama hugs me, careful not to crush the bag. "You did well, Lena," she says. "Chukil, you were brave." I look down at the package in my hands. For a moment, I feel proud. We made it. We have something to bring home. But as we walk away, I hear a commotion at the table. People are arguing, voices rising. The soldiers are shouting. Someone screams. Mama pulls me faster. I grip the package tighter, afraid it will be snatched away. We move quickly through the crowd, weaving between tired bodies and hopeful faces. I hear a loud bang behind us, and everyone ducks. My heart pounds. We don't stop until we reach a quiet corner, away from the crowd. Mama kneels down and checks the package, making sure it's all there. She smiles at me, but her eyes are wet. "We did it, Lena," she says. "But I know, even with the package in my hands, tomorrow we may have to come back. The line, the fear, the waiting, they never really go away." I look at the bag, wondering what's inside, hoping for something sweet. But mostly, I hope for another day, another chance. And then, in the distance, I hear the sound of more drones. The day is not over yet. We walk through the ruined streets of Gaza, my mother and I, the aid package heavy in my aching arms, and every step feels like the echo of a memory I wish I could forget, but never will. Because here, in this wounded city, every moment is stitched together with fear and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow will be a little softer. I hear the drone of the machine circling above us, a sound that never leaves, never allows you to fully rest. And sometimes I find myself wishing I could hear even a single bird sing, just once, to remind me that Gaza is still alive, that life for a child should be filled with songs, not with this relentless buzzing and distant, unending thunder. People pass us on the street, their faces drawn tight with hunger and exhaustion, eyes empty, but somehow still searching, and I see other children like me, little survivors, the real story of Palestine etched into their thin frames and tired eyes, each carrying their own silent stories, their own private games of survival, games we never asked to play. Mama holds my hand so tightly, I think she's afraid the wind might snatch me away if she lets go. But really, I know she is holding on because she needs to remember what it feels like to protect her child, to give love even when there is so little else left to give. As we pass a group of women huddled on a cracked stone wall, I catch the eye of a little boy with a bandage around his head, his gaze curious and full of questions he is too tired to ask. And in that moment, I wish I could tell him that this is not just a child's story, not just a bedtime fable to be forgotten when the light goes out, but a true story, my story, his story, the story of every child trapped between the hunger and the bombs, between Israel and Palestine, between what the world calls politics and what we know only as life and death. A man shouts something about flour, another about water, and somewhere behind us a woman sobs quietly into her scarf, her voice lost in the endless hum of drones and the faint thumping of artillery, a sound that blends into my dreams and into the taste of every meal, making it hard to remember a time before all this. Before Gaza became a word you hear on the news. Before I understood that every true story here is written in survival and hope, in the soft prayers whispered by mothers who refuse to let despair win. We turn the corner, and for a brief moment the sunlight breaks through the clouds, dust swirling in the light, and I can almost imagine that somewhere in another country, a child is listening to this real story, my story, maybe sitting safe in their own home, maybe thinking it sounds like a movie or a sad episode from Squid Game. But the difference is that nobody here in Gaza chose to play, and the only prize is making it through another day, holding on to your family and keeping hope alive inside a heart that's learned to beat quietly, so the world doesn't notice how scared you are. Mama slows down to catch her breath, and I watch her carefully open the relief package, her hands trembling a little as she checks what's inside. Bread, a little flour, a can of beans, treasures that would mean so little to most, but here are the difference between a child's story ending with a lullaby or with the sound of another empty stomach. My sister runs to greet us, her thin arms wrapping around my waist, and for a second, just a second, it feels like we are still a family, not just survivors in a war zone, not just numbers in a headline, not just the background noise for someone else's real story. While we eat, I look at my mother, her eyes dark with exhaustion but still shining with something stronger than fear. Love, maybe, or maybe just the habit of hope. And I wonder if anyone listening to this child's story truly understands what it means to survive in Gaza, to live in Palestine, to live under the shadow of Israel's drones, to wake every morning and wonder if this is the day your luck runs out. Sometimes I want to scream that this isn't a film, this isn't a game, this isn't a true story you can pause or walk away from. This is my life. Every hungry hour, every prayer for peace, every moment we are not allowed to be just children. I think of Squid Game again, of those bright colors and frantic running, the fear and the hope mingled in every challenge, but I know there are no cameras here, no audience cheering or crying for us, only the silent, watchful sky and the hope that someone, somewhere, will hear this story, this real story of Gaza, and realize that as you listen, I am still here, still a child, still hoping for one more sunrise. And when the meal is done, Mama pulls me close, her hand gentle on my hair, and you are brave, Lena. Braver than I ever was. I want to believe her, but I also know that I would rather be safe than brave, that I would trade every story for just one peaceful night, for just one day where Gaza is quiet and I can listen to my mother laugh, not cry. I look out the window at the sky burning bright from the bombs, and I wonder, as you finish listening to this episode, if you will remember my name, if you will remember that this is not just a child story, not just another news clip about Israel and Palestine, not just a tale from Gaza, but a true story that goes on even after you turn away. Because while you are safe, while you finish your meal and close your eyes, I will still be here, surviving, hoping, telling my story. And somewhere, behind the noise and the hunger and the waiting, I still dream of a different game, one where every child in Gaza, every child in Palestine, wakes up to a morning filled with songs and bread and hope.
I can taste blood in my mouth, and my hands won't stop shaking. Not from fear. I've lived with bombs for so long that terror feels normal now, but from hunger. The kind that eats you from inside, that makes your ribs show like prison bars across your chest. My name is Zeynep. I am 12 years old, and I am writing this because I know I'm going to die soon. Not from bombs, though they fall every day, but from hunger. The kind of slow, painful death that the world pretends not to see. I want you to know what it feels like. To watch 950 trucks full of food sitting just beyond our reach, while your little brother cries himself to sleep with an empty stomach. I want you to understand what it means to see your best friend disappear under rubble on Rashid Street, to count 43 bodies in a single morning, to become one of Gaza's lost children while you're still breathing. My diary tells the story of how Gaza's children die, not just from Israel's bombs, but from the world's silence, how we become war children, starving children, forgotten children while you debate politics over our graves. In 3 days, I've watched 23 people die from hunger. Tomorrow, I think I'll join them. But before I do, I need you to hear my voice. I need you to know that we weren't just numbers in your news reports. We had names, we had dreams, we mattered. This is my story, my truth, my final gift to a world that let me die. The morning sun crept through the cracks in our damaged window, casting broken shadows across our small room. I opened my eyes and immediately felt the familiar gnawing pain in my stomach, a constant companion that had been with me for weeks now. My name is Zeynep. I'm 12 years old and I live in Gaza, where every dawn brings both hope and despair. I could hear my little brother Mahmoud whimpering softly beside me. At only 5 years old, he had already learned not to cry loudly when he was hungry. We all had learned that lesson. His tiny ribs were visible through his thin shirt, and his eyes seemed too big for his gaunt face. I gently stroked his hair, whispering the same words Mama used to comfort us. "It will be okay, Habibi. It will be okay." But deep down, I wasn't sure if it would be. I tiptoed to our small kitchen, hoping against hope that maybe, somehow, there would be something, anything, to feed my family. The cupboard stared back at me, empty and accusing. The refrigerator had been silent for weeks now, no electricity to keep it running. All that remained was half a cup of contaminated water and a piece of stale bread so hard it could break teeth. Mama was already awake, sitting at our small table with her head in her hands. Her once beautiful hair had grown thin, and her clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame. When she heard my footsteps, she quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile, the same brave smile she wore every day to protect us from her own desperation. "Good morning, my flower," she whispered, using the pet name that once made me giggle but now made my heart ache. I could see the pain behind her eyes, the weight of being unable to feed her children crushing her spirit day by day. Baba came in from outside, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Another day of searching for work, another day of closed doors and empty promises. The occupation had destroyed so many businesses, so many dreams. He sat heavily on the floor, his strong hands that once built homes and provided for us, now trembling with weakness and frustration. "Any news about the aid trucks?" Mama asked hopefully, the same question she asked every morning. Baba's silence was answer enough. I turned on our small battery-powered radio, hoping for good news. Instead, the broadcaster's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. International organizations' 950 aid trucks intended for distribution to Gazans have been held by occupying Israel for months. 950 trucks. I tried to imagine what that meant. Mountains of food, medicine, clean water, all sitting somewhere, waiting, while we sat here slowly starving. My younger sister Layla, only 8 years old, looked up at me with questioning eyes. How could I explain to her that help was so close, yet so impossibly far away? The radio continued, and a spokesperson from the Qassam brigades spoke words that echoed in my empty stomach. The world is watching children die of hunger, and some countries are still making secret or open deals with Israel. Children dying of hunger. Children like us. Children like my neighbors. I thought of little Yusuf, the 40-day-old baby from the building next to ours. Yesterday, his mother Fatima came to our door, her baby limp in her arms, his tiny lips blue. "He won't wake up," she kept repeating. "He won't wake up." Mama tried to help, but what could she do? We had no milk, no medicine, nothing. Baby Yusuf had become another victim of this manufactured famine, another number in the growing list of those who died not from bombs, but from the slow, cruel weapon of starvation. The kitlik, the famine, was consuming Gaza like a silent monster. Every family had a story like ours. The Ahmeds from downstairs had sold everything they owned just to buy a bag of flour. The elderly Khalil from across the street had collapsed from hunger 3 days ago and hadn't gotten up since. We were all slowly disappearing, becoming ghosts of ourselves. As the day wore on, the hunger pains intensified. It started as a dull ache, then grew into sharp, stabbing sensations that made me double over. Mahmoud began crying again, his small fists pressed against his empty belly. Layla sat quietly in the corner, having learned that complaining about hunger only made Mama cry. "Tell us a story, Zainab," Mahmoud pleaded, his voice weak but hopeful. I gathered my siblings around me and began to tell them about the 950 trucks. In my story, they weren't held at checkpoints by Israeli soldiers. Instead, they were magical trucks driven by angels, loaded not just with food, but with toys, books, and dreams. The trucks would arrive at our door, and the angel drivers would have kind eyes and gentle hands. They would fill our kitchen with warmth and laughter, and Mama would cook us a feast fit for kings. But even as I spoke, reality crashed back down on us. Those trucks existed, but they remained trapped in a bureaucratic maze designed to keep us hungry, to break our spirits, to make us beg for mercy that never came. Evening brought no relief. Baba returned home with the same empty hands, the same broken expression. The aid organization spoke on the radio about their concern, their urgent appeals, their strongly worded letters. But concern doesn't fill empty stomachs, and appeals don't satisfy crying children. As night fell over Gaza, I helped Mama put my siblings to bed. Mahmoud's stomach rumbled loudly in the darkness, a sound that seemed to echo off the walls of our small room. Layla asked when the trucks would come, her voice barely a whisper. "Soon, Habibti," I lied, stroking her hair, "very soon." But as I lay in the darkness, listening to my brother's quiet sobs and my sister's restless movements, I wondered if those 950 trucks would ever reach us. I wondered if the world really was watching us die, as the radio had said. I wondered if anyone out there understood that behind every statistic, every news report about Gaza's hunger crisis, there were children like us. Children with names, with dreams, with hearts that still hoped despite everything. I closed my eyes and tried to dream of those magical trucks again. In my dreams, they always arrived just in time, bringing not just food for our bodies, but nourishment for our souls. In my dreams, no child in Gaza ever had to fall asleep hungry again. But in Gaza, dreams and reality rarely meet, and morning always comes too soon, bringing with it the same empty cupboards, the same gnawing hunger, and the same cruel hope that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. Outside our window, the lights of the checkpoint twinkled in the distance, the same checkpoint where 950 trucks sat waiting, while 950,000 children went to bed hungry, dreaming of tomorrow. The explosion that shattered our morning came without warning, like death itself knocking on Gaza's door. I was writing in my secret diary, the only place where I could pour out the screams trapped inside my chest, when the earth beneath us trembled. The windows rattled, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound that had become the soundtrack to our nightmares. The whistle of falling bombs followed by the thunder of destruction. "Rashid Street," Baba whispered, his face pale as he listened to the radio. "They've bombed Rashid Street." My heart stopped. That's where my school friend Noor lived. That's where little Samir used to play football with the other boys. That's where Maryam sold bread from her small cart, always giving extra pieces to hungry children like us. The radio crackled with urgent voices. Breaking news. Occupying Israel has bombed Rashid Street in northwestern Gaza. There are martyrs and wounded. Martyrs. Such a beautiful word for such an ugly reality. In Gaza, we don't say people die. We say they become martyrs, as if giving their deaths a sacred name could somehow make the pain more bearable. But I'm 12 years old and I know the truth. These aren't martyrs by choice. These are murders. These are children and mothers and fathers torn apart by metal and fire while the world watches and does nothing. I grabbed my worn notebook, my diary that I hide under the broken floorboard, and began to write with shaking hands. "Dear world, today they killed more of us. I wonder if you're keeping count, or if Palestinian children don't matter enough for your mathematics. Do you sleep well at night knowing that we don't?" Mama came running into the room, her hijab askew, her eyes wild with fear. "Have you seen Noor? Has anyone heard from Noor's family?" I hadn't. Nobody had. That's how children disappear in Gaza. Not slowly, not with warning, but in an instant. One moment they're laughing, playing, dreaming of tomorrow, and the next they're just gone. Lost children swallowed by Israel's war machine, becoming statistics in reports that the international community will read over their morning coffee before moving on to sports news. By afternoon, the news grew darker. The radio announced that at least 43 Palestinians had been martyred in the morning's attacks. 43 hearts that would never beat again. 43 dreams turned to dust. 43 families destroyed while the world's leaders gave speeches about measured responses and the right to defend. I wanted to scream at them. What about our right to live? What about our right to exist without terror raining from the sky? The streets filled with savaş çocukları, war children like myself, wandering aimlessly with hollow eyes and empty stomachs. These weren't the children I remembered from before, full of laughter and mischief. These were ghosts wearing children's faces, aged beyond their years by trauma and hunger. We recognized each other instantly, we war children of Gaza. We shared the same haunted expressions, the same premature understanding of mortality, the same bitter knowledge that the world had abandoned us. I found Ali, my 10-year-old neighbor, sitting on the rubble of what used to be a playground. His clothes hung on his skeletal frame like rags on a scarecrow. His sister had been missing for 3 days now. Another Kayıp Çocuk lost in the chaos of Israel's campaign of terror.
"Do you think they'll find her?"
He asked me, his voice empty of hope. I wanted to lie, to comfort him, but we war children had learned not to lie to each other. Adults lied to us enough. I don't know, Ali. I hope so. But I didn't hope. Hope was a luxury we couldn't afford in Gaza. When I returned home, I found Mama sitting on the floor sobbing. Her whole body shook with grief and rage and helplessness. I had never seen her like this. My strong, brave mama, who always found a way to smile, to make us feel safe even when the world was crumbling around us. "They took Noor," she whispered through her tears. "Sweet little Noor with the braids. She was buying bread for her grandmother when the bomb fell. Noor, my friend who drew flowers in the margins of her school notebooks. Noor who shared her eraser with me when mine wore down to nothing. Noor who dreamed of becoming a teacher someday. Gone. Just like that. Another child sacrifice on the altar of Israel's occupation. Another life deemed worthless by a world that had forgotten how to feel shame." Baba came home that evening with fury burning in his eyes, a rage so pure and terrible that it scared me. His gentle hands, the hands that used to tickle me and braid my hair, were clenched into fists. 43, he repeated, pacing our small room like a caged animal. 43 souls, and they call it defense. They murder our children and the world applauds their precision. He slammed his fist against the wall, and I saw tears streaming down his face. Tears of rage, of helplessness, of a father who could not protect his children from monsters wearing uniforms and flying flags. "Where is humanity?" he shouted at no one and everyone. "Where are the people who claim to believe in justice? Are Palestinian children not human enough for their compassion?" His words echoed my own thoughts, the questions that haunted my diary entries. Had the world forgotten how to see us as human? Had they convinced themselves that Palestinian blood was cheaper, Palestinian tears less salty, Palestinian dreams less valuable? As night fell, our neighbor Ahmad knocked on our door. In her trembling hands, she held a small piece of bread, probably her family's last meal. "For the children," she whispered, pressing it into Mama's hands before hurrying away. This is what Gaza had become. A place where the starving fed the starving, where mothers gave their last crumbs to other mothers' children, where humanity survived only in the hearts of the abandoned. The world's governments sent weapons to Israel and thoughts and prayers to Palestine. But it was women like Ahmed who kept us alive with their impossible generosity. I broke the bread into 4 pieces, one for Mahmoud, one for Layla, one for Mama, and a tiny piece for myself. As we ate in silence, I thought about Noor's empty chair at school, about Ali's missing sister, about all the Kayib Chochuklar who would never come home. That night, as I lay in the darkness listening to the distant rumble of tanks and the whistle of drones overhead, I wrote one final entry in my diary. "Dear God, dear world, dear anyone who still has a heart, we are disappearing. One by one, Gaza's children are vanishing into the smoke and rubble of Israel's war. We are becoming ghosts before we even die. And you, all of you who have the power to stop this, you look away. You change the channel, you buy your coffee and drive to your jobs and kiss your children goodnight, and you let us fade into nothing. History will remember your silence. History will judge your indifference. And when your own children ask you what you did when Palestinian children were dying, what will you tell them? That it was complicated, that it wasn't your problem, that we didn't matter enough." Outside, another explosion lit up the sky. Another family destroyed, another child lost, another number for tomorrow's news reports. And somewhere in the world, people slept peacefully, dreaming dreams that Palestinian children would never live to see. I don't know if I have the strength to hold this pen anymore, but I must write. My hands shake not just from hunger now, but from something deeper, the knowledge that my time is running out. The radio announced it this morning, though I barely had the energy to listen. In the past 48 hours, 23 people have died from starvation, with the death toll from malnutrition rising to 23. 23 souls. And I think I might be the 24th. My name is Zainab. I am 12 years old. I live in Gaza, and I am dying of hunger while the world watches. But before I become another number in your statistics, before I become another line in your reports, I want you to know who I was. I want you to remember that I had dreams, that I had a name, that I mattered. The psychology of fracture began 3 days ago when we received the news of Ahmed al-Hassanat. He died of starvation, not from bombs or bullets, but from the slow and brutal murder of hunger. Just like 4 others who died of malnutrition, malnutrition, as if such clinical words could capture the agony of a body exhausting itself to survive. Two of them were children like me. I felt something crack inside my chest when I heard their names. Not my ribs, those had been showing for weeks now, but something in my soul. The realization that this war wasn't just stealing our homes, our schools, our friends. It was stealing our very existence, one empty stomach at a time.
Gaza had become a graveyard of starving children, destroyed not by explosions, but by the terrible silence of bodies giving up. We, the lost children, were losing ourselves, not to the bombs, but to the systematic starvation orchestrated by the Israeli siege, becoming the ghosts of the children of war, haunting our own lives before death took us. This morning, I couldn't get out of bed. My legs felt like water and the room spun when I tried to sit up. Mama rushed to my side, her face a mask of terror that she tried to hide behind false smiles. "Just rest, Habibti," she whispered, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She was watching her daughter fade away, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. I closed my eyes and felt my powerlessness. My powerlessness washing over me like a cold tide. All my 12 years of life, all my dreams of becoming a doctor, of healing people, of changing the world for the better, were being stolen by hunger. My psychology was breaking, shattering like glass under the weight of this manufactured pain. But then, Mama began to tell me a story. "Once upon a time," she said, her voice trembling but determined, "there was a little girl who lived in a land of olive trees and orange groves. Her grandmother used to say that even in the darkest nights, if you looked closely enough, you could always find stars." As she spoke, other voices joined hers. Our neighbors had gathered around my bed. Ahmad, Abu Khalil, little Fatima from next door. They came not because they could save me, but because they refused to let me die alone. This is what Dayanishma means in Gaza. Standing together, even when standing is all you can do. The children came too. My fellow Savaş çocuklar who understood without words what was happening. We had all seen death's face many times. We recognized its approach like an old, unwelcome friend. "Tell us about your dreams, Zainab," whispered Sarah, a 10-year-old whose own ribs showed through her torn dress. So I told them. With what little breath I had left, I painted pictures of the future I would never see. I described the hospital I would have built, the children I would have saved, the diseases I would have cured. I told them about the medical school in Jerusalem where I had planned to study, about the clinics I would have opened for refugee children, about the research I would have done on malnutrition, the very thing that was killing me now. "But you know what?" I whispered to them, my voice barely audible. "Even though I won't become a doctor, maybe my story will save someone else. Maybe someone, somewhere, will read about us and remember that we were human." As the afternoon wore on, I felt myself slipping away, but I had one last thing to do. With Mama's help, I reached for my diary and began to write what I knew would be my final entry. To the world that forgot us. My name is Zeynep. I am 12 years old and I am dying of hunger in Gaza while you live your comfortable lives. By the time you read this, I will be another statistic, number 24 in your count of starvation deaths. But I was not just a number. I had a favorite color, blue, like the Mediterranean Sea I could see from my window. I had dreams to become a doctor. I had a best friend, Noor, who you let them kill with your bombs. I had a little brother who looked up to me, and a sister who braided my hair when I was too weak to do it myself. Israel starved me to death with your permission. Your government sent them weapons while sending us empty words. Your media called our suffering complex, while our children died simple deaths from simple hunger. You made our genocide seem reasonable, our extermination seem justified, our erasure seem necessary. But here's what you don't understand. Killing us won't kill our truth. Every Palestinian child who dies becomes a witness against you.
Every empty stomach becomes evidence of your crime. Every breath we don't take becomes an accusation that will follow you forever. I forgive the world for letting me die, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I refuse to let hatred be the last thing in my heart. But I do not forgive the lie that this was inevitable. My death was a choice. Your choice, Israel's choice, the world's choice. To Mama, I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry I couldn't become the doctor who would heal your pain. But remember, your love kept me alive far longer than food ever could have. You are the strongest woman I know, and Mahmoud and Layla need that strength now. To my brother and sister, be kinder than the world was to us. Dream bigger than they told you to. Live longer than they wanted you to. And never, ever let them convince you that Palestinian children don't matter. To the children reading this someday, don't let them do to other children what they did to us. Don't let them make another Gaza, another famine, another graveyard of dreams. You have the power we never had. Use it. I can hear Mama crying now. I can feel my heartbeat getting slower. The room is getting darker, but somehow I can still see stars. Maybe that's what umut means, hope. Not the naive belief that things will get better, but the fierce insistence that meaning can be found even in the worst suffering. That love can survive even the cruelest endings. That truth can outlive even the most powerful lies. Gaza taught me how to die, but Mama taught me how to hope. Remember us. Remember that we were here. Remember that we mattered. Remember that you let this happen. And please, please don't let it happen again.